All right. Well, hi everyone. It's nice to be back, and thanks for having me. And today again for our didactics. Today I have the pleasure to have one of our first year doctoral student, Alana. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Bluffton University, Bluffton, Ohio, and her interests are in child assessment, child psychotherapy, treatment of obsessive compulsive disorders, eating disorders, and anxiety disorders. And she has also a special interest in social media. And when I mentioned about this presentation, and I said, would you like to present with me? And so that's going to be probably for her doctoral level, her first community presentation. So I'm excited to get started with her sections, and I'll just view in and move on from that part. So thanks for listening. Go ahead, Alana.
All right.
Hold on.
Are you sharing?
Well, we also wanted to say happy holidays to everyone. I know the break is coming, and whichever holidays you're celebrating or not celebrating or just having a break, we wish you happy holidays and a great new year.
Are you sharing the slides, Dr. Ergun?
Yes, you cannot see it. Hold on.
I might have to reshare after we practice.
Oh, okay. Okay, so let me just get here and try to do that. I think that happens each time we go back, come back, and come back. Okay, so let me try to do that. Can you all see now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can see from the beginning. Okay. All right.
Got it.
All good? Okay.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you all for having us here today. Before we get started, I kind of wanted to mention what social media is and kind of the background content of what social media can look like. So social media is the applications, services, and systems that allow users to create, remix, and share content, and involves social networks, media sharing, blogging, microblogging, which is like Twitter, where you have a limited word count, and collaborative content. Most of these platforms can be accessed via websites and apps on smartphones, with some of the most common being Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, YouTube, and TikTok. But there are many more that are constantly being created and used. And individuals can engage on these platforms through uploads, likes, comments, and shares or reposts. So here are some important statistics about adolescents and social media use I thought I would share. So 84% of American teenagers owned smartphones in 2019. 45% of adolescents said they were online almost constantly. And Snapchat is the most frequently used app amongst adolescents for social media, with 35% of them using Snapchat more than other forms of social media. More than 70% of Black and Latinx adolescents use at least one form of social media, and all adolescents' screen time engagement is an average of 7 hours and 22 minutes every day. And then I wanted to mention, in terms of cyberbullying, which we will discuss in later slides, approximately 1/3 of 12 to 19-year-olds experience online harassment, and they experienced that within the year of 2013.
So I wanted to jump in this section and kind of like talk about why everyone is using, and what is kind of like a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of the science kind of like behind while we, I say we, because we're also adults as well, not just the teens or children, or kind of like really have this need for social media. So as we all know, we are social animals, and from the prenatal time to end of our life or advancing years in our lives. So I wanted to talk about this need for human connection and this perpetuating cycle that we have. So as far as kind of like the underlying mechanisms for the use of social media, what kind of drives us is starting with that dopamine as far as kind of like the reward system. As we know, it's the key player in reward and pleasure center of our brain that creates that reinforcing effect through forming neural circuits that kind of increase the likelihood that similar positive experiences will continue to occur. For example, when children and parents engage in that playful interaction, dopamine is released and there is immediate pleasure. So that gets encoded as an event in the memory to ensure that there will be future replication of that interaction. So that reward system and that reward network is the neurological reason and underlying reason for the compulsive use of online social media among the teens. We also know that during the teenage years, parts of the brain that has a dopamine reward system is larger and there is more exaggerated activity. Anyone who works with teens or who is raising teens or preteens, including myself, we all know that the emotions are larger, they're bigger, everything is very important. So pain and pleasure are very intensely felt than any time during their lifetime. So because of this increased size and high level of activity, it drives the teens' need for social approval. And that's why they value it. And then that's what they find in social media. So social media helps the teens accumulate that constant supply of social rewards. It's almost like they're collecting it in terms of peer recognition, approval, and then these reward networks in the brain that are already kind of like more pronounced, they get triggered with each like in or online interaction. In terms of the endorphins, as we all know, when we exercise, we have endorphins. It kind of makes us feel pleasant afterwards. So they are the body's natural narcotics. So they generate powerful feelings of overall well-being. We feel good after that. So the release of the endorphins, for example, when there is a mom and an infant interact, it fosters that secure attachment. And the release, for example, when you laugh with your child, when you play, it promotes the child's likelihood that they will find pleasure in social interactions. And then the children or teen, they feel valued and they feel positive about themselves. And then we need it. We need endorphins. We need to feel good. So that creates that human need for connection. And then the last part is the oxytocin, which is, as we all know, is the human bonding and relationship hormone that's released by the hypothalamus in the brain when the individual, for example, interacts with in a kind and a trusting way. So large amounts of oxytocin is released, for example, when mom and a baby, they are breastfeeding, or during early childhood experiences, which all of us, work in that early childhood piece too, when there is that attachment and that love. So as the mom smooths and comforts a distressed child, for example, dopamine and endorphins get released, and then they create feelings of that pleasure and well-being. And at the same time, oxytocin is released to enhance the work of the dopamine and the endorphins and deepens that sense of attachment and connection between a parent and a child. So these are kind of like the underlying kind of like reasons and the pleasurable sensations with that strong emotional reactions and connections parent feels for the child are kind of like linked in a way that becomes that self-reinforcing. So we might see like, okay, then how is that related to social media? Well, online relationships can be seen or perceived as real as offline relationships. So connecting through the social media releases the dopamine and providing pleasure and connection. So studies show that connecting on social media can actually increase oxytocin levels by 13% while decreasing cortisol or stress hormones down by 10 to 15%. So they're kind of almost like at that same level. So also we know that on social media, people tend to talk more about themselves. We don't do that when we are face-to-face, right? We do give and take, we do a dialogue, we wait for our turn to talk about ourselves. But on social media, it's all about ourselves. So if the percentages, people talk 30 to 40% of all about themselves face-to-face, whereas it's 80% on social media. So disclosing information about self on social media activates the same pleasure centers in the brain as when we connect with others in real life. So really, we're tricking our brains. Brain interprets the online interactions just like as an in-person interaction without really having that stress of needing to communicate with or socialize with people because we need to do small talk, we need to do, our body language. We don't really need to care for any of those stuff. So that's why it's also very attractive to teens. So it creates this compulsive loop where we have this need and teens have this need to gather thousands of virtual friends to feel that same feelings of being liked.
All right, and then I know there's a lot of challenges with social media that's usually depicted, but I also wanted to kind of share the benefits because there are some positives to social media use. So social media has been shown to increase communication in children and adolescents, both inside and outside of the classroom. And it also positively impacts self-regulated learning, which improves metacognition, information processing, and navigation skills through the interactive formats and short text descriptions that they see on social media platforms. Since social media is free to use, it provides more accessibility to mental health resources and information for youth on social platforms. And one of the ways that we've seen this is with trends and challenges that encourage youth to participate in positive mental health awareness. For example, recently there was a hashtag 100 Happy Days challenge where you post what makes you happy each day for 100 days. And a lot of the youth kind of engaged in that and got to share what it was like in their life. So that was kind of a really positive aspect. It can also create a sense of community and social support for children. Often adolescents may feel isolated when they're going through these physical, emotional, and social changes, as you may know. But these supports help them feel like they are not alone. And using hashtags to find others going through the similar experiences can be very useful to seek validation and support. And then being able to be anonymous allows youth to openly talk about their private experiences and feelings without judgment, especially with some of the negative stigma that mental health carries. So adolescents may feel more comfortable de-identifying themselves to share their thoughts and feelings online. Social media has been found to initially lead students to decrease peer relationships short term, but it kind of helps re-strengthen their long-term bonds over a period of time. So I thought that was interesting too. And then there are some obvious challenges to social media, as I'm sure you are all aware of and have experienced with your clients, but I just wanted to mention some of them. So exposure to violence is increased with social media due to more all access content and is also in a lot of video games that children play frequently. And then cyberbullying is a large issue online because it is easier to bully others through a screen instead of face-to-face. And anonymity can influence cyberbullying by creating a new identity from your physical self. So often these kids are able to kind of create a new face and a new personality that they can't really express in person. And sometimes that can be negative for them. Privacy is a danger, especially pertinent to younger children who have less of an acknowledgement of privacy and dangers of the internet, which can lead them to sharing private information online with strangers or posting inappropriate content. And talking with strangers online for children and adolescents increases the risk for sexual abuse and exploitation. Convictions are on the rise for offenders, increasing by 35% from 2005 to 2012, which has likely increased within the recent years. Grooming is a tactic used to entice children to send inappropriate videos or pictures to offenders who typically offer praise and validation. And then scamming can also occur with this, where strangers pose as family members, friends, shopping ads, and more in order to receive access to account passwords and other sensitive information. It can be difficult to establish boundaries to prevent these dangers, sometimes resulting in conflict between the parent and child, and can kind of create a feeling of distrust in the child because they fear of getting their phone or their laptop taken away because they don't want to be taken away from this social experience online. Lack of education and prevention of exposure to these threats increases the risk of dangerous content exposure, especially with younger children. And then I also wanted to mention poor academic performance has been found in youth who frequently use social media because it increases their multitasking behaviors, such as a student who engages in social media and texts while simultaneously doing homework or being in a classroom setting. And then these mentioned here serve as gateways that can lead to harmful and dangerous behaviors within social media. Cookies are in many websites and allow advertisers to track an individual's browsing history. So allowing cookies opens up vulnerability to a user's information when cyber attacks occur. While not all apps are dangerous, some may have a lack of security or contain malware that can damage a smartphone and also release private information. The refresh and like button can be addictive to anyone who is seeking validation or a sense of popularity, but it also increases social comparison to others who have similar posts. And then peer-to-peer software allows multiple computer systems to connect to each other over the internet to share files, and can be extremely dangerous because it typically involves downloading and sharing copyrighted information, which is illegal, but also can expose you to harmful malware as well. And then with many of you working with the youth population, I thought it would be helpful to mention the impact of social media on mental health. Social media allows more access to communication, which creates pressures and demands on relationship maintenance for youth. Compared to older generations, youth now have more accessibility to communicate with their peers whenever they want, which often makes children believe that they should be in constant communication with others in order to achieve high social status. Social comparison occurs more with passive social media use, such as scrolling through their feed, where they are looking at others' posts and profiles and comparing it to their own. This often generates a depressed mood, low self-esteem, and loneliness from viewing others' lives that appear to be better than their own, even if that's not really the case. Teens who are more interested in being popular tend to be more stressed about using social media because they are looking for ways to gain followers, build a better profile, and gain more likes and comments. So they're kind of put on more pressure to be popular or be famous. Sleeping habits can be affected when engaging with social media at night by increasing blue light exposure and oxytocin levels, making it more difficult to sleep. And then adolescents of color are at risk of higher exposure to online sharing of racial discrimination and racial stress, especially with the rise in awareness of the racial justice movement in the past year. So this constant repeated exposure of discrimination has been shown to increase depressive symptoms, anxiety, and alcohol use disorder in adolescents of color.
So if the parents come to us and asking for suggestions, I just wanted to kind of like highlight, that's kind of like our last piece, as to what we can do, what are some of the areas that we can discuss with them that could be helpful to address some of the issues that Alana mentioned that could create some of these mental health issues or difficulties and disrupt their relationships because of the focusing on the use of social media. So I think the most important piece is discussing expectations for internet or social media use. So let's think about prevention. We might all slip at all times, like holiday times could be more relaxed, but whenever school time comes back, resetting everything and having that clear plan as to, okay, what are you allowed to do online? And then creating these rules with the teams, making things very concrete and not saying things like be nice to people online, but just saying, do things on the internet that you would be proud to share with me. And then putting them positively, but also telling what they're not supposed to do and being very concrete in that sense. And we need to also specify and kind of like post them somewhere. So there is not like this disagreement between the youth and the parents as to, oh, I thought I was allowed to do this. No, 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 you weren't. So kind of like just we do with a behavioral plan for the children, even for youth, then we should have this kind of a plan and then just post it somewhere so we can kind of like refer back to and reminding them. Also, if they do not follow this plan, the agreed plan, then what are the consequences or what will happen if they do not follow these rules? And of course, it's very important to also review these rules quite often and then relate them to their daily routines. For example, once you finish your homework, then you're allowed to be on Instagram or something like that. So whatever the agreed upon rules are. Second piece is catching them being good, which, you know, we all work with children and teens. So that's the rule of that positive reinforcement. So Jamal joined social media and then on a platform where they kind of like think that it's fun to make fun of their classmates. So he might earn points every day he doesn't willingly not join that social media to make fun of his friends. And he earns points and he can use those to exchange money to buy baseball cards. So it's that naturally occurring good behavior. We catch them right then and there, and we provide that incentive. On the other hand, as we all know, we can also use that removing privileges, which let's say Tom sneaks in to check his Instagram after the agreed hours, and mom puts a block to play for the video games. Well, Tom adheres back to the time limits that was agreed. Mom removes that access. So that's removing that and putting it back. So that's using that negative reinforcement to work around those issues. But if these fail and these don't work, and we know that it might not work with kids who are impulsive, and we work with a lot of those kids who have, you know, ADHD, FASD, and neurodevelopmental disorders, or who are older and who are not really wanting to engage in those positive behaviors on their own, or very young. Hopefully they're not allowed, but if for some reason they are, then they might not have that control over. So then we bring in the logical consequences or the incentives. So sometimes parents worry that it's a bribery, but it's actually incentive. We're asking the child to do something that is hard for them to do. If they could do it on their own, they would have done it already and we would have seen it. So it means that we tell them if you stay off of the restricted websites, then you get extra computer privileges. So we are providing in some bonus, and all of us, even adults, work with the bonuses, and that kind of actually works. Auditing our own use of technology, and I'm sure we're all at certain points guilty of that, having the phones kind of like on our hip, where we use it in the dinner time, or if a message comes in and dings, and then we just have that feel to kind of like look at it ourselves. So establishing specific times and areas for it to use so we can model it for the kids as well. And then another one is, of course, that's very important, is monitoring the teens' use of devices regularly. Looking at their screen names, passwords for all sites, and noting them somewhere, and then checking regularly to see if you can access using those passwords and user words after a certain time, because they might change them, and then you might not have access, you might not even know. So establishing that monitoring and telling them that you'll be checking their devices, and teens definitely need this type of structure. And also making clear what information they can collect on their devices, what can they download and what they're not allowed to download. Not allowing them to change the device capabilities without your permission, not giving them the credit card or the Apple ID so that they can download. So kind of like making things contingent upon your permission would be helpful. Also following them on the social media websites like FaceTime, Instagram, and to see who they are liking, who their friends are. If you see someone who is totally stranger, and if you ask them, who is this person? And they don't have an idea or they don't know, well, go ahead and, deleting them and discussing them with them, because that might be one predator they might have mistakenly added on. And also using a lot of those surveillance tools to block access to certain sites. So I think what's important to remind to the parents is that teens, as we all know, frontal lobe is still developing. They always don't have the best judgment. It's a work in progress. So making sure that we can still continue to be their external brain, their frontal lobe, and making sure that we also have the conversations around who's your friend offline, and whether they have like all their friends online, but they have no friends in real life. So then we might need to sit down and talk about maybe social skills. Maybe we need to focus on that piece. And another piece is if they go to a friend's house, what do they see? What are they viewing? Do we know that? Maybe having that really nice conversation with the parents of their friends to see how they will monitor that when they're alone and kind of like on their own. And then the last piece is, as Lana nicely mentioned, is a cyberbullying. It can be both ways. They can be bullied and they can bully as well. So if they can be involved, for example, in something like a hate campaign, and they might say like, well, now everyone is against this person, so I'll just kind of like, put a same like for that one. Well, it's really important to discuss with children what is the impact and what is the meaning of that. How are you contributing to the decline of the mental health maybe of that other person who is being in this situation? They might not see it as cyberbullying. They might not conceptualize it that way, but it becomes the parent's job to explain that, how else can you show that you have a reaction towards this friend? Are there other more helpful ways? Is that something that you can talk face to face? So what is the impact and what is the meaning of those online behaviors so that they learn early and they can continue those more healthier ways of interaction in their face-to-face interactions as well. And of course, discussing sexuality, encouraging to tell you as the parent, if someone sends them materials, and having those discussions all the time. And then the last piece, as Alana has mentioned, is discussing as the parents the sleep issue. Initiating and maintaining sleep is a very important part if they're online all the time. And we know that from research that anxiety arises when they sleep less. So having like a no online 1 hour before sleep rule and having that more of that quiet time, whatever they would choose, as part of that planning process, so that they would have a restorative sleep that would be away from the blue lights and just kind of like all of the harmful parts of being on time and on the screen all the time as well. So our references and our questions.